Hare Krishna. Welcome to another episode in Lives of the Vaishnavacharyas. I'm your host, Chaturatma Das. Glad to be with you all again. I don't think that there's a single person out there that knows what has occupied my time for the last 2 weeks. Anybody that's a regular viewer of Krishna.com or that has anybody that they know in Alachua or is a member of Facebook knows that we had an absolutely amazing deity installation here last weekend, and it was just incredible. It was so wonderful. I felt so fortunate and so blessed to be able to take a part in it, even though it meant I had to postpone a couple of our shows. 1 week was helping to build the new extension for our altar for Krishna and Balaram, where they're bathed every morning, and then of course the next week just recovering from the entire weekend. But I don't know how many of you, I see Manjesh and Bhakti and Carol are in our chat room, and how many of you are listening. But those of you that are, you can go to Krishna.com to their new designed website. Really, really nice. And there's a nice picture right at the top of the installation ceremony and a link to the page that has additional pictures. And you can view Jivana Krishna's, the queen of photography here in Alachua. The photos that she's posted, I think she's almost like over 1,000 photographs or something. It's really quite amazing. So it's very, very nice. And I see that Manjesh is saying he watched it on Krishna.com. Actually, it was really nice. It was another one of those amazing services Krishna.com brings that allowed them to broadcast that. They had their scaffolding set up right at the back of the tent, being able to view the entire thing. And really, really wonderful. Bhakti and Carol also obviously watched it. And just amazing event. We're so fortunate in this age of technology that, of course, we have both sides, that which will distract us from Krishna consciousness. But as Prabhupada liked to quote Rupa Goswami, Yukta Vairagya, to use something in its real purpose, to be detached from attachment to it materially, and to engage it in the service of Krishna, such as this type of technology. And it's one of the many indebtedness. It's one of the many ways that we're we're indebted to Krishna.com for facilitating all of us being connected in this amazing world of Krishna consciousness through deity installations and through programs like this on Monday nights, and the Japa seminars that they have, and Mother Indrani's discussions on the teachings of Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, and all of these different things that are available. What to speak of the ever-growing and always increasing webcams that you can hook up with any temple. I figured it out that you can actually, if you're at home in Alachua, you can actually go to Guru Puja while simultaneously attending Mangalarti in Los Angeles. So you get double the pleasure. So all of these things are brought to you by all the hard-working and sincere devotees here at Krishna.com. And it's a wonderful service they do. And for those of you that have the opportunity and the means, I very wholeheartedly encourage you to support them in their efforts. Just go to Krishna.com/donate, and it'll direct you how to make whatever offering you're able to make to help these programs go on and continue to go on, and to continue to expand in so many ways. Manu was sharing with me just recently his plan to be able to have webcams in all the 6 Goswami temples in Vrindavan, which is not a small feat to get all the 6 Goswami temple managers to agree to something like that, but if it can be done, it would be so wonderful. So, very, very nice opportunity. Tonight, having mentioned about the deity installation and the wonderful devotees that attended, we're very fortunate to have 2 of the best-known pundits for puja in ISKCON. Braj Bhakti Vilas from Lodhia, India, disciple of Lokanath Goswami, and South Indian by birth, and Gorkeshava Prabhu, who is spends half his time living in Sri Rangam in South India and the other half living in Maui in Hawaii. He has actually, he's the only member of ISKCON that's been formally trained and initiated in the proper Ramanuja samskaras and pujas and everything at the request of Srila Prabhupada. And very, very knowledgeable, the two of them. and then our own pundits here, to which I was able to assist them. And it was just really, really a nice opportunity. So many sincere and advanced devotees. And then, of course, we had a whole slew of sannyasis that attended. Indradumna Swami, Lokanath Swami, Bharshana Maharaj, Radhanath Maharaj, Bhakti Vishramadeva Maharaj, who am I forgetting? So many. I think there were 7, 8. Rtavaja Maharaj, Devamrita Swami. It was just very, very nice to have so many wonderful devotees, and we probably had about 2,500 guests. Nice article in both the local papers. The small local community paper for Alachua did a huge color spread in the middle of their paper. 7 or 8 beautiful big photographs of the event, and the Gainesville Sun wrote a nice article leading up to the event. So a lot of coverage from the local media and press, and a lot of attendance by wonderful devotees, all culminating in the final wonderful result of Krishna and Balaram now standing on our altar. And if you go to the Alachua webcam, you'll be able to see, as the webcam has been adjusted now and gives a full wonderful view of Gaura-Nitai, Radhesham, Jai Shri Krishna Balaram. So, in this mood of speaking about deities, there's one of my favorite deities in Vrindavan, and I wanted to speak about that deity and the history of that deity tonight. But before we start with that, we need to get a little background, and that background starts with Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Many times I've discussed the life and history of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and particularly his acquiring of the Shalagram Shilas. He was instructed by the Lord in a dream to go to the Gandaki River in Nepal, in the Himalaya Mountains, and while there he attained the Shalagram Shilas, and we all know the story, how he got them and then put them back and so on like that, and then returned to Vrindavan with these Shalagram Shilas and began to worship them. And we all know how on the day before Nrsimha Chaturdasi, that one very wealthy businessman was going around Bhakta and giving charity gifts for the deities of the different Goswamis, and he came to Gopal Bhatta and presented crowns and clothing and garlands and jewelry, and Gopal Bhatta laid these all in front of his Shalagram Shila and prayed, "My dear Lord, what can I do?" You know, actually this was Nrsimha Chaturdasi itself, that this man was giving in charity that day. And so that evening he prayed to the Lord, "My dear Lord, what can I do? I have the desire to offer these things to you." Thinking in that way, he chanted his rounds and took a little sleep, and we know the story of how Radharaman appeared. And in this way, he began the process of worshiping Sri Sri Radharaman with great devotion and great focus, and serving Radharaman in such a way that he had no other desires or thoughts. But after some years, he did become concerned that after his own disappearance, how would the service of Sri Sri Radharamanji continue? So he had one disciple. That devotee's name was Gopinath. You remember the story, I've told it many times. He had stayed at the one man's house in Hardwar or Varanasi. I'm not sure I remember which. And after staying there, then the man promised to send his son, and 10 years later, sure enough, the son showed up. And in this way, he became the disciple and servant of the disciple of Gopal Bhatta and servant Gopal Bhatta. So in this way, Gopal Bhatta was thinking, you know, I have to look after the long-term service of the deity, and this is an important instruction to all of us in the process of serving the deity before we begin an installation, or before we go to Govardhan Hill and acquire Govardhan Shila and bring him into our home. How will this service go on? If I am to leave this planet, what will happen to this seva? So in this way he requested Gopinath, "My dear Gopinath Brahmachari, you please take up the Grihastha ashram and produce children, and then in this way the longevity of the service to Sri Radharamanji will be solidified." So Gopinath must have been aware of the instruction from the Srimad Bhagavatam when Lord Brahma instructed the 4 Kumaras to take up household life. They refused. Third canto this is told. And Prabhupada says in the purport to there that this is the only instruction of the spiritual master one can refuse to follow. So Gopinath requested Guruji, I do not have a desire to enter the Grihastha ashram, but I have one younger brother. He's already married, and he's a nice person, good devotee. Let me bring him, you can initiate him. So in this way, this disciple became known as Damodar Goswami, because the line of the disciples coming adapted the last name. So Damodar Goswami became the servant of Radharaman, along with Gopinath Acharya, Gopinath Goswami. And in this way, the worship was continued. And even to this day, the line, I think it's 17th or 18th generation coming from Gopal Bhatta Goswami, the service to Radharaman is continuing in the way that Gopal Bhatta originated it. Now, there's one individual in this line, Sarvabhauma Madhusadana Goswami. Sarvabhauma Madhusadana Goswami was distinguished as a great preacher and a wonderful Vaishnava scholar. And he had the association. He met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta's father. He met Bhaktivinoda twice, once in 1906 and once in 1912. And he met Bhaktisiddhanta in between there in 1911. It mentions in his personal diary, which is kept in the archives at the Radharaman Temple, that September 6, 1911, Sri Bimal Prasad Siddhanta Saraswati, who we know as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, came tonight at 9 p.m. Ramananda Babaji was also present. We discussed many intimate subjects of Krishna Katha. And then again on the 7th, the next day, he wrote, again this night, we heard from the voluminous writings of Sri Bimal Prasad, and the writings appealed to us very much. So, in this way, there was some association. They developed a friendship and correspondence, went back and forth and like that. On the 22nd of December, 1914, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur entered into his samadhi, it mentions that at that time Prasad from Radharaman was sent by Sarvabhauma Madhusadana Goswami to Bhaktisiddhanta to be placed with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he met both Bhaktisiddhanta, and he also met one of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's disciples, Abhay Charan. He had the opportunity in the early days to meet him when our Srila Prabhupada was aspiring Acharya of the Gaudiya Vaishnava line. And another person from Madhusadana is Vishvambar Goswami, who is the father of the priest we now know as the head of the Radharaman temple, Padmanabh Goswami. And Vishvambar Goswami was considered one of the main scholars in Vrindavan at this time that at this time the Srila Prabhupada was residing there. And when Prabhupada came to Vrindavan in 1971, he came back, you remember the story, with some American disciples and brought them to Vrindavan. And they were received in a very grand way at the Vrindavan Municipality City Hall. At that time, Vishvambar Goswami was the first mayor of the Vrindavan Municipality. And he, knowing Srila Prabhupada from their friendship, he received him and his disciples in a very grand way. And he gave the opening talk as well at that time when there were the dignitaries there, and spent quite a bit of the talk glorifying Srila Prabhupada. Actually, he personally told me, Vishvambar Goswami, that Srila Prabhupada, when he lived down the street there at the near Keshigat, that he had one bicycle he would ride to market, and it had a creaky tire and a bell that would ring. And when he would come by Vishvambar Goswami's residence there at the Radharaman Mandir, he would ring the bell and they would exchange greetings like that. So anyway, in his younger years, Vishvambar Goswami was a very well-known criminal lawyer. He had studied law and had gotten his degree. And then he got the order from his father to begin the preaching and take up the responsibility of seva at the Radharaman Mandir. So he spent some time pursuing regular occupation and then was put into the service of Radharamanji. And without any conversation, he immediately left his practice and began to serve the deity and become a very well-known preacher of the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was the only Goswami in the 1970s and 1980s that traveled throughout the world. He came to New York. My wife and I hosted him when he was in New York. He went to different universities in Europe, and he would preach the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Very, very well known. Oxford University, Frankfurt University, they used to invite him as well as his son Padmanabh now to come and lecture there. So we now have a little bit of a historical reference in this line coming from Gopalapati Goswami. Now, this personality we mentioned, Sarvabhauma Madhusudana Goswami, was clearly in the line of Gopalapati Goswami. And he had the right, he was given the responsibility of worshipping the deity of Radharamanji. He was actually a very well-known devotee, great scholar, well-versed in Nyaya, in grammar, in Sanskrit, and in all the various philosophies, and highly devoted to the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He actually toured India several times, going through all the different parts of India, spreading the message of Mahaprabhu with great enthusiasm and great determination, very vigorously. So, at that time, Kedarnath Dutt Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and some other scholars, as I mentioned, they had a close relationship with him. And because his life was completely devoted to Mahaprabhu, and because he had unshakable faith in Mahaprabhu, this meant he also had strong, strong faith in the holy name. So he would enthusiastically preach this all around. Now, he had two disciples that wrote very prominent books. One of them was a disciple, Sri Kumar Ghosh, and he wrote two books. One was the Amiya Nimai Charita, the Amiya Nimai Charita, excuse me. And this was a Bengali book. And then he wrote an English book called Lord Gauranga. So he put these pastimes available to both speaking languages. And then he had another disciple, Krishna Gopal Dugal, who wrote an additional book on Mahaprabhu's life, and it was printed in the Urdu language so that it could be distributed through Pakistan and like that. Now, through the inspiration of Sarvabhauma Madhusudana Goswami's own disciples, he was encouraged to install deities in many different places throughout India, deities of Mahaprabhu. And this is where our story begins tonight. So this is all bringing us up to that point. Now, in Navadvip at that time, Sarvabhauma Madhusudana Goswami was able to attain the seva, the responsibility, the ownership, however you would like to describe it, to a very old, life-sized named deity of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Very wonderful deity. And the name given to this deity was Sri Amiya Nimai Gauranga Mahaprabhu. So, by the instruction of Sri Madhusudana Goswami and by the inspiration of his disciples, he had this worship of the deity very, very nicely cared for. Particularly one disciple, Sri Radha Govinda Goswami, arranged to have this deity installed in Bagh Bazaar in Calcutta. And we know this Bagh Bazaar will become very famous in the life of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. This is where he had one of his main preaching centers. Excuse me. So, Radha Govinda Goswami arranged for this seva to go on. Now, Radha Govinda Goswami came from a very high-class Brahmin family, very well educated, and all of his ancestors, as far back as he could review, were all great devotees of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So his particular skill, he was highly skilled as a musician. And so he would use teaching music as his means of livelihood. Whatever money he would acquire by teaching the practice of music, this is what he would use to live on. And he would use all of that in the service of this deity of Amiya Nimai Gauranga Mahaprabhu. Beautiful, huge deity with beautiful, beautiful features. So, in this way, he continued on like this. Now, in Calcutta, where he was residing, all the devotees, they respected and honored him very much for this service that he was completely dedicated to this Gauranga Mahaprabhu deity. He was very, very dedicated. And once Sarvabhauma Madhusudana passed away, he continued on with that worship. And interesting point here, he didn't have the slightest feeling that this is a deity of Mahaprabhu. He thought this was indeed Mahaprabhu himself. This was his Siddhanta. This was his realization that this isn't a deity. This is actually the Lord himself. This is how he viewed him. So as he was growing older, in his elder years, he began to worry about the future of the service of the deity. There was no successor in his family. He didn't have any children. And in this way, we see a similarity between the concerns of Gopal Bhatta Goswami for Radharamanji. So he began to think in this, once I become infirmed and helpless and old, preparing to leave this world, who will care for him? Who will take care of the Lord? So he went to the deity and he questioned the deity directly. In the future, who and how will your service be maintained? Now I thought this was an interesting point because Srila Prabhupada instructed us like this, that when we become pure, we will understand the deity will speak to us. I remember there's one famous story amongst the Pujaris when Srila Prabhupada was having darshan in Dallas in 1972, that as he was having darshan, he turned to the Pujari and he said, so what is the mood of the deity? To which the Pujari, 1972 ISKCON, what do we know about anything, kind of looked befuddled. And Prabhupada said, no, you are the most intimate servant of the deity, therefore you should know their mood. So this is both a blessing and a responsibility of the Pujari caring for the deity to understand what is the deity's mood, to take full responsibility for seeing that that mood is executed and carried out. So in any way, Radha Govinda Goswami went to the deity of Mahaprabhu and requested like this, when I'm gone, how will you be cared for? Who will take care of this? So that night he had a dream, and the deity came to him in a dream and said, stop worrying, just be peaceful. Said, soon you will arrange to take me to Vrindavan, where the son of your guru lives, the son of Sarvabhauma Madhusudana Goswami. Now I'm using the name Goswami, and some of you may be confused. Wait, how could he have a son? Goswami is the family name, not necessarily the ashram that is being followed. So all of the Goswamis in Vrindavan, they have the caste name of Goswami, but it doesn't necessarily indicate that they are in the sannyas ashram as a renunciate. So he said to him, the son of your guru, Sri Madhusudana Goswami, lives in Vrindavan, and soon you will arrange that he goes there. That I go there and I'm taken care of there. So don't concern yourself. Don't worry. So in this way, upon receiving this instruction in the dream, he woke up the next morning and he immediately wrote a letter to the son of Sarvabhauma Madhusudana, whose name was Sri Krishna Chaitanya Goswami. So Sri Krishna Chaitanya Goswami received this letter and he explained to him, here is the order of Mahaprabhu. He has told me such and such in a dream. He has expressed his desire. It is my concern, and so in this way I'm asking you to take this responsibility. So please now take the arrangement of bringing Mahaprabhu there to Vrindavan. Now, Sri Krishna Goswami thought for a moment, because he was not unfamiliar with Radha Govinda Goswami or with the Amiya Nimai Gauranga Mahaprabhu deity. So he thought to himself, this is a very big deity. How will this deity be transported to Vrindavan? And once he gets to Vrindavan, where will he reside? It's a very large deity. We have no temple this big. And once he gets here, not only where will he reside, but how will his seva go on? Who will look after him? How will these things be done? He was not sure at all about this, so he simply ignored the letter. He expressed, actually, he didn't know, he wrote back and expressed some inability and uncertainty about the task he was being asked to do. So, Radha Govinda Goswami wrote him again. And he requested him in a second letter, you must take this responsibility. It is the order of Mahaprabhu that this be executed. And it is therefore my desire as the provider and caretaker of the deity. So in this way, this exchange was going back and forth between them for some time. So one day, in the evening, while singing the song Geet Govinda to his deity, Radha Govinda Goswami left this world. Now, for the local devotees, this was a heart-rending tragedy. Nothing was in place for his departure. The service of the deity was not taken care of, and now this most wonderful devotee who they had all depended upon, who had guided them through their devotional service, who had instructed them about the principles of the teachings of Mahaprabhu, had now left this world. So they began to worry. How will the order of Mahaprabhu be carried out? How will the deity get to Vrindavan? He had no successor. How will this be executed? So, as was the circumstance, the police came and locked up the temple. Now, whether they closed it because they were concerned about theft, or whether they closed it because, there was some uncertainty or some political intrigue, none of that is explained. Simply the police came and locked up the temple, allowed no one in. So the devotees, they were concerned about the seva of the deity, so they started coming to the front of the locked door and offering Manasa Puja, placing all of their bhoga physically on the steps of the door, and offering everything and performing all the bhajan and performing all the seva and performing all the arti in their mind. So shortly afterwards, some time passed, and the police, they came and they unlocked the gates and went in and searched the quarters of Radha Govinda Goswami. And in his quarters, they found copies of his correspondence to Sri Krishna Chaitanya Goswami and the letters that Sri Krishna Chaitanya Goswami had written back. So they saw this as undeniable proof that it was the desire, the last will and testament, if you will, that the deity should be taken to Vrindavan. So the police constables and local officials wrote to Sri Krishna Chaitanya Goswami in Vrindavan and said, okay, now you have to execute the order you've been requested. It is your duty to come here. It's been indicated in his last will and testament that this is his desire, so you have to come and do this. Elsewise, how will the deity be cared for? So now Krishna Chaitanya Goswami had no excuse, no other alternative. He went to Calcutta. He openly discussed the matter there in Vrindavan with his disciples and with the local devotees and others. And then in 1936, he arrived in Calcutta. And there were many, many prominent devotees that went with him, and many prominent devotees from the local scene there. And great discussion was had about how this would be done and what the circumstances would be and how these things would go on. So they decided, now remember, the deity is very large. So how to transport the deity? You can't just, So yeah, so what they decided was they would reserve one entire train car, one with no seats in it, and they would put some cloth down, and the deity would be laid in there. I don't know if you've ever seen, any of you listening, I don't know if any of you have seen this deity. He's huge, very, very big. So they arranged that one entire train car would be occupied by this deity, and he was laid on some nice cloth in this way, and then transported. And they put him on the train in Calcutta, and he was transported all the way to Hathras. Now Hathras is the stopping point, because at that time the train didn't go any further, didn't go to Vrindavan. Hathras is like, you would say, like a subdivision of Mathura. So from Mathura to Vrindavan at that time there was no train. So he arrived there, and the idea was then to transfer him to a large truck and then take him to Vrindavan. Now, when the deity of Mahaprabhu arrived in Hathras, the devotees were so ecstatic, so excited, so profusely overwhelmed that they wanted immediately to serve the deity. And they offered all kinds of nice bhoga. And a matter of fact, they refused to allow the deity to leave for 4 days. They laid down in the path and wouldn't let the deity be transported. So for 4 days the deity stayed there, and they offered nice seva, and there was bhajans going on, and nice Krishna Katha being spoken in front of the deity, and bhoga being offered. All of these different things were done. And a very, very nice seva was done. So after some time, they agreed, okay, the deity can now go. And then the deity made the procession and was put in this huge truck laying in the back of this big truck and then transported to Vrindavan. Now, it was 500 years ago when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself arrived in Vrindavan on the full moon of Kartik. And exactly on the full moon of Kartik, during that time, it was actually the 26th of November, 1936, Amiya Nimai Gauranga Mahaprabhu arrived in Vrindavan. So this was seen as much more than a mere coincidence by the local devotees. So all the devotees, all the Vaishnavas in Vrindavan, they received him with unprecedented welcome and great pomp and circumstance and just incredible offerings and kirtan and procession and just such a wonderful event. So now, as Sri Krishna Goswami had been concerned, at the time there was no suitable spot for such a large deity. So just outside the main gate of the Radharaman temple, there's an area called the Ras Mandal, and in there is a large room, very high ceiling. And so for some time the deity was placed in that room, and this is where the deity resided. And it was approximately 4, maybe 5 years that the deity stayed there and received their seva there. And then, a bit later than that, there was one Sri Sa Gupta, who was, he's the present pujari at the Shahji temple in Vrindavan. He and his grandmother, Srimati Ramadevi, who were wealthy local devotees, they constructed 2 very large rooms on the bank of the Jamuna in what was the gardens of the Saji temple at that time. This place was known as Jugal Bagachi. Bagachi. My Bengali is as bad as my Sanskrit. At any rate, it's an area there at the back of the Saji temple where he resided. And this became the residence of Mahaprabhu. And he stayed there and received his seva for about 16 years. After this period of time, it was decided that Mahaprabhu needed his own temple. So Sri Krishna Chaitanya Goswami thought, he's got to have his own temple. He must have his worship conducted in this place, something that can be done smoothly and regularly, a nice facility. So by some arrangement, he had attained a piece of property in Gopinath Bazaar, which is just maybe 10 minutes from where the Radharamanji temple is. And through great effort, we know a little bit about this effort from just recently having built facilities here for Krishna Balaram. Actually, when it was decided that Krishna Balaram would seriously be installed, they've been residing here for quite some number of years. They've been just waiting for their opportunity for quite some number of years. They were originally brought to this community by the graces of Vijayananda and his wife Kirtida. And so one of the arrangements for them to be installed was to have a new kitchen built, because our kitchen was too small, and to move what was currently the Pujari hallway, practically, into the old kitchen so there would be sufficient space, and then to build an extension so that these smaller deities could be worshipped there. So these were the conditions that were required for Krishna Balaram to come. And through much endeavor, the local management here in New Raman Reti arranged for this under the direction of Mother Mukhya and the board of directors. The construction went on. The facilities were engaged. This story, there's a very nice description of how this all took place on Dundabats.com, written by Ranjit, one of our board of directors. And so at any rate, all these arrangements had to be made. So in the same way, or we're doing in the same way, prior to this, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Goswami began to arrange for all of these facilities for this building of a temple. Now, most of the contributions and a great amount of the cooperation for the temple's construction came from a group called the Amrit Bazar Pratika. And this is a group of devotees from Calcutta, where the deity had originally been worshipped, that had kept their connection of offering seva to the deity. And so they very wholeheartedly supported getting a temple built exclusively for Mahaprabhu. So in 1956, the temple was finally finished, and with great ceremony, the installation was performed of the deity being moved and brought into the new temple, and the facilities being readied, and great rejoicing, wonderful festival, big mahotsav, kirtan, pushadam distribution, all types of things that are associated with a wonderful festival. These all went on. So since that time in 1956, the deity of Mahaprabhu is conducted there and carried on very continuously and very regularly. And after Krishna Chaitanya Goswami, his only son, Vishwambar Goswami, took up the responsibility not only for the Radharaman Seva, but for the overseeing the Seva at the Amiya Nimai Gauranga Mahaprabhu temple. And then, of course, his sons, Padmanabh Goswami and Padmalochan Goswami, currently oversee that now that Vishwambar Goswami has passed away. And Padmanabh Goswami's son, Chandan Goswami, is now preparing to step into those shoes and take up that responsibility also. So this is a very nice way at which the story of how Amiya Nimai Gauranga Mahaprabhu came to Vrindavan from Bengal and how he's worshipped very nicely. Now, there are many festivals that are observed throughout the year there, as there are in any temple, but there's one particular festival that I'd like to speak about. And this is the festival of the arrival of Mahaprabhu in Vrindavan. Both Mahaprabhu's personal arrival and the arrival of the Amiya Nimai Gauranga Mahaprabhu deity. Now, during this time when Mahaprabhu first came here, it was the full moon in Kartik, as I mentioned, and Mahaprabhu visited all the places in Vrindavan that are associated with the Leela of Radha and Krishna and their various pastimes there. And so, following in this tradition, there is a 4-day festival observed every year by the devotees of this temple. And as a major part of this festival, the devotees from this Amrita Bazar Partika group in Calcutta, the head of that group, by the way, was devotee Ramdas Babaji Maharaj. And he was the one that was cooperating with Sri Krishna Chaitanya Goswami in Calcutta to arrange for the transport of the deity. So during that time, his group of devotees come, and they're very involved in this part. Every year for the last, how long have they been doing this for? So many years. They come and they've been doing this kirtan for Mahaprabhu like this. So the first day of the festival is Adivas Kirtan, and this is a very special kirtan performed by these Bengali devotees that come. I had the good fortune one year as the guest of Padmanabh Goswami to come and attend this kirtan, and it is the most astounding kirtan. The kirtan group itself consists of multi-generational ages of devotees, very young devotees up to the most senior devotee who is in charge of the program. And they sit in the temple room and they begin the kirtan very nicely. And the devotee that's directing, conducting, whichever musical phrase you care to use, the kirtan is not playing an instrument, but he's simply absorbed in the kirtan and indicating who should play what mridanga, who should play the kartal, what rhythm should be followed. And before the kirtan starts, 2 brahmacharis come around with sandalwood paste and flour in one hand, and the other brahmachari has garland. And all the members of the kirtan party are garlanded. And then they go back and they garland all the mridangas. And then they put sandalwood paste on the heads of all the members of the kirtan party, and they put sandalwood paste on the mridangas and kartals. And in this way, all the instruments and all the bhaktas are worshipped. Very, very wonderful. Then they begin the kirtan. Very nice and steady and slow. Very solid, wonderful kirtan. Very, very nice chanting of the holy name. And then as the kirtan goes for some time, then the leader of the kirtan gives some indication, almost offhand. And the kirtan picks up in beat and in rhythm. And the devotees begin to become much more frenzied. And then he conducts his hands a little further and they all stand up. And they begin to dance. And they dance in this circle around the kirtan. And it's just the most amazing. And then they drug in a few of us. There was 3 or 4 of us. Myself and Madhava Prabhu attended this, and to this day I regret the fact that I had no recording device with me. And so they arranged for bringing us in, and the dancing is going on. And this kirtan leader, he is simply by the movement of his hand or the nod of his head conducting who does what and how the kirtan goes, and the mridanga should do like this, and the kirtan is going and the speed is picking up, and then he crashes it all to a stop and then picks it back up at a very slow pace, very nicely, very smoothly. And the kirtan goes on like this for 2, 3, 4 hours, something like that. Then at the end of the kirtan, they all take prasad. Wonderful kirtan. This has been going on for years and years and years and years and years. So this is the first day of the festival. The second day of the festival, all the learned scholars and pundits spend the day in the temple in front of Amiya Nimai Gauranga Mahaprabhu, reading from all the different shastras. And they spend the entire day engaged in reading the Holy Scriptures. The third day, the kirtan is done by a style of kirtan that displays the Akrura Leela of Akrura coming and taking Krishna and Balaram away. And Mahaprabhu had actually gone during his original visit to the Akrura Ghat to see this the place, to take darshan there. So in this way, they performed this wonderful pastime. And this is one of those amazing Vrindavan kirtans that, Leela performances that takes place all night. I've been to one of those in my visits to Vrindavan. It's just amazing. All night long it goes. So then the fourth day, in the morning, the kirtan, the Leela kirtan, the theatrical performance, it finishes. And then after the morning is done, that is the full moon day. And then a procession starts from the temple. And that procession goes to every one of the spots throughout Vrindavan that Mahaprabhu visited. And this is personally visited when he was visiting Vrindavan during his Leela. And then after that, the kirtan, it comes back to the temple. And again, the kirtan goes just so amazingly. And goes and goes and goes. And then finishes with this absolutely amazing distribution of prasadam to all the devotees involved. So this is a wonderful festival, and if you have the good fortune to be in Vrindavan during the Kartik month, on the full moon at the end of Kartik, you should make it a point to go to the Amiya Nimai Gauranga Mahaprabhu temple for this kirtan. And it will be a once-in-a-lifetime experience that you will not regret. So I wanted to share that, as this is one of my favorite deities in Vrindavan, one of the most wonderful places you can be, and one of the best-known secrets of Vrindavan that very few devotees are aware of. So we're going to finish there this evening with this pastime of this wonderful deity of Vrindavan. If anyone in our chat room, we only get our 2 faithful followers, Manjesh and Bhaktin Carol. I don't think there's anybody more devoted to hearing about the lives of the Vaishnavacharyas than the 2 of them. If either of you have any questions, I see Adi has also joined us a short time ago. And if anyone has any questions they'd like to put in the chat room, I'll be happy to try and answer those. I hope that tonight my dear friend Dhruva Maharaj was listening, as he sometimes does, so he can correct all of my mistakes in telling this story. Because Dhruva Maharaj is one of those people that knows the entire history of Vrindavan just from his heart. He is studied, and he wrote that first book on all the histories of Vrindavan, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. And this is a wonderful book and has all the histories of all the different places. So, it's nice that sometimes we hear from these devotees what's the correction. So, at any rate, as I say, we will be resuming our schedule of every other Monday. So 2 weeks from tonight will be is the last day. Adi is asking if the last day, the full moon of Kartik, is also the appearance day of Radha Kund. I'll have to check on that. It is around that time period, Adi. I don't remember exactly the answer. I know many other persons would know that right off the top of their head, but I don't know the answer to that. If you find me on Facebook, Chaturatma Das on Facebook, you can post that question to me again, and then I'll look up the answer and let you know the answer to that during the week. So you can find me on Facebook and remind me that I'll research that and get you the answer. So we're going to finish there. As I mentioned, if you have the opportunity to help support the activities of Krishna.com, go to Krishna.com/donate. Offer whatever you can to help them with their continued service here. And once again, we thank you for joining us in another chapter of the Lives of the Vaishnavacharya. I'm your host, Chaturatma, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Hare Krishna.